All right, this is Chemistry Unit 5, Video 3. For atoms with a valence number of 5, 6, or 7, so we're talking about groups 15, 16, and 17, completing the octet by gaining electrons. Excuse me, that doesn't make sense. They complete the octet by gaining electrons. So an atom that gains electrons, it's important to note, still has the same number of protons in its nucleus. So the number of protons is not going to change. But the atom now has more electrons that have a negative charge than they have protons with a positive charge. So the net charge of this ion is going to end up being negative. An ion with a negative charge, here's the word, and is pronounced anion. Most anions are nonmetals. We can predict the charges of anions using the periodic table. So, for elements in group 17, each of these elements has 7 valence electrons. So remember, valence electrons is group number 17 minus 10. There's 7 valence electrons. So elements in this group will gain 1 electron and form an anion. So let's look at, how about fluorine? Fluorine is in group 7. It has group 17. It has 7 valence electrons, and it's going to gain 1. So here's fluorine. Now it has number 8 right there. Let's talk about the net charge. Fluorine has 9 protons. So net charge is protons minus electrons. So 9 protons. It had 9 electrons here. Now it's got 10. And so 9 minus 10 tells us the charge is -1. So things in group 7 with 7 valence electrons form an anion with a -1 charge. We end up here with a fluorine with a -1 charge. So elements in group 16. Talk about the valence electrons. Group number, subtract 10. There's 6 valence electrons. So elements in this group will gain 2. It's easier to pick up 2 electrons to get to 8 than it is to give away 6. So they gain 2 electrons and form an anion. So let's look at one. Let's look at, how about sulfur? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It wants to get to 8. It's going to gain 2 electrons. Here's 1. Here's 1. Keep this little one consistent. All right, so here's 1 and here's 1. So now it's got 8 electrons. And let's look at its net charge. So it has 16 protons, and this one has 16 electrons, but the ion has 18 electrons. 16 minus 18 says it has a -2 charge. And let's also make sure that this electron dot structure of the ion tells us everything we need to know. So when you add a couple of electrons, we have to indicate that it is now charged. So the sulfur has 8 electrons, 8 valence electrons, bracketed, charge -2. Same thing for the fluorine, set it in brackets, and the charge is -1. There's elements in group 15. So group 15, the valence electrons is 15. Subtract 10 from the group number, 5 valence electrons. So for elements in this group, it's going to be a little bit easier to pick up 3 electrons than it is to give away 5. And so let's use nitrogen as the example. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 valence electrons. And so it's going to gain 3. So we'll put 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. Now it has its 8 electrons. That's the complete octet. That's what we're going for with these. And we have to indicate that it now has a charge. Let's look for the net charge. So it has 7 protons, and it picked up 3 additional electrons, which means 10. And so it has a -3 charge. And so this electron dot structure that shows the complete octet is surrounded by brackets and the charge of the ion. And so we end up with nitrogen 3 minus. Right in the sulfur too. So elements in group 15 will gain 3 electrons and form an ion with a -3 charge. Let's look at a couple others. So chlorine. Chlorine has 17 protons. When it's neutral, it's 17 electrons. Looks something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it's a lot easier to gain 1 than it is to lose 7. And so its net charge is 17 protons minus, it now has 18 electrons. So its charge is -1, and we say that's Cl minus. Its name is chloride. Oxygen, 8 protons. When it's neutral, 8 electrons. And here's my neutral oxygen atom. It is unstable, and it wants to gain 2 electrons. It has 6 valence electrons, but it wants a complete octet. Its net charge, 8 protons minus, it's now going to have 10 electrons. That's -2. And the symbol of its ion is O2 minus. Phosphorus, 15 protons, 15 electrons when it's neutral. Here's its electron dot structure. And it will have a complete octet if it gains 3. Net charge, we're talking about 15 protons minus, it now has 18 electrons. So the charge will be -3, and the ion will be P3 minus. Something to look at while we're on the same page. Remember, they're going for a noble gas configuration. So we have helium with 2 electrons, neon with 10, argon with 18, and on down the list. if you take a look at these, so don't write this on your notes, but here you had a fluoride ion, it ended up with 10 electrons. Here you have a sulfur, it ended up with 18. 10 is neon, 18 is argon. Your nitrogen ended up with 10, that's the neon configuration. Your chloride ended up with 18, that's argon. Your oxygen ended up with 10, that's the neon configuration. Phosphorus, 18, that's the argon configuration. So whatever these ions charge, the number of electrons should be the same as one of the numbers in group 18 of the noble gases.